So the Friday of the weekend of the riots, I drove into the police station to pick up my paycheck, and I couldn't understand because there were these short-haired, t-shirted, jean-wearing, trainer-wearing white guys on every street corner. So these were obviously police officers, and they were on every street corner. And I asked what was going on, and it was explained to me this was Operation Swamp, that they were doing a massive stop and search operation in order to try and get on top of street robbery. But I sensed, even on the drive in, before I knew anything about it, that this was completely over the top. So obvious what was going on, that these, so obvious to everybody that these were police officers. And, that tension that there had always been, because people were being still now disproportionately stopped and searched if you're black compared with if you're white. And all it needed was a spark, a trigger incident to kick the thing off. And it happened. Some guy got stabbed. The ambulance didn't arrive. The police decided to take the guy to hospital in the van. They thought that the police had stabbed the guy or had beaten up the guy or that the guy had died at the hands of the police, and that was the trigger for the riots.
And did they do anything to the guy?
No. I mean, it was, he was a guy who had been stabbed in an incident. It wasn't anything to do with the police. The police were trying to do the right thing, but because they'd been doing the wrong thing around stop and search for so long, it was an incident that was just waiting to happen. It was designed to be misinterpreted because there was such a lack of trust between the police and the community.
What were your spirits of that riot?
So Saturday I was at home watching TV, and I saw officers I knew with blood streaming down their faces that had been, hit with lumps of paving slab and stuff. So I phoned up the police station and said, do you want me to come in? Because I had local knowledge. A lot of the officers there didn't know their way around and stuff. And I was told in no uncertain terms to come in. So I got in my car, drove into Brixton, got as close as I could. And I was given 10 officers, 5 plastic shields, and told to clear Mail Road because there were buildings and cars on fire. And the fire brigade were coming under attack from the rioters, so they couldn't put the fires out. So our job was to clear Mail Road so that the fire brigade could come in and put out the fires. I mean, it's very frustrating because you've got these guys, they don't know who you are, and they're throwing, lumps of paving slab and bricks and whatever they can get their hands on, they're throwing them at you. You can't get close to them because you'd get injured. So you sort of had to playing cat and mouse with them all the time. But it wasn't until the next day when I saw the TV footage and realised how dangerous it was that I felt frightened. At the time, I was just so focused on keeping my people safe, the officers that were under my command, and keeping me safe, that I didn't really think about how dangerous it was. So, lots of adrenaline, getting really frustrated, paying attention all the time to what's going on around you. I mean, we did it. We drove the people back, and inevitably they'd run out of ammunition at some stage. But the next day, you sort of took stock of what it was like, and that was scary. I mean, Newcastle Fire was another terrible incident, and the black community felt that the police had not investigated it properly. So it fed to the general atmosphere of lack of trust in the police. How much it had a direct bearing on the riot, you'll have to talk to the rioters.
So the 85 riots, how did that one start?
So I wasn't at Brixton then, but my old inspector, Douglas Lovelock, accidentally shot Cherry Gross, gave her life-changing injuries, and that was the trigger from memory. Did I get that right? Yeah.
So you wasn't involved. You wasn't, when you said you wasn't at that one. You wasn't there.
I wasn't at Brixton at the time, but when I went back, I met Michael. Michael Gross was the guy that the police were looking for when they raided the mum's home, And so we had some interesting discussions. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember. I think he was at the front counter at the police station, and there was some argument going on, and I sort of got involved in that and calmed him down and said, look, you know, what are the issues, and why don't we work together on this rather than fighting each other.
And what did you? So you said. So when you did that, did you agree to do that? To work together?
Yeah, you know, obviously wary because of the history that the black community had with the police. You know, why should I trust this guy when we haven't been able to trust anybody before? But you know, things happened. Opportunities present themselves, particularly when I was a commander. Back in 2001, 2002, incidents happened where you could prove that you could be trusted. It was an uprising. It was the community rising up against the police because of the way that the police were treating them, and it wasn't just the black community. Although they were targeted, there were poor white people who were also had a hard time at the hands of the police. And so it was the community of Brixton rising up against the police on that occasion. You can tell the difference. There was a riot when I was a police commander in 81, and they broke into the local department store, I can't remember the name of it now, and they stole all the Chanel perfume and left the cheap stuff behind. That's a riot. This was an uprising, 81.
Did it change anything? Like within the community, within Brixton community?
Well, following 81, there was a lot of investment in the area to try and improve things. The attitude of the police hardened, I think, because they felt that they'd lost control of the streets during the riots and they wanted to prove that they were in charge. So if anything, I think the attitude of the police got worse towards the black community. But there were more opportunities provided, there were better facilities provided for local people. They smartened the place up a bit. So there was, you know, there was some good that came out of it. But it was a long, long time before there was real community engagement from the police. And
just what kind of changes are you talking about? Like what opportunities were open within that time?
So they had schemes to help young people find jobs or to give them the skills that they needed in order to make them more employable. They bulldozed some of the houses that were set on fire during the riots, and they created sort of community facilities, you know, playgrounds and stuff. So they tried. They invested some money in it, and they tried to help the situation as far as the black community was concerned, as far as they could go. It's interesting because recently I found an article online where I was criticised for saying that keeping the peace, stopping people from rioting, is more important than enforcing the law. That was the conclusion that Scarman came to. You know, that you can't just have a massive swamp operation to try and cut if robbery levels are too high, if it means that the consequence of that is that you completely lose control over the streets because people riot against it. And so that was a powerful lesson that came from Scarman. The other lessons from Scarman about, well, I don't know whether he really grasped the nettle about racism in the police. I mean, I talked to a senior black officer a couple of weeks ago, and he said that, I have to be careful not to name him here, when he was in a particular part of London, there were officers there who had attitudes that were 15 years old. Institutional racism is a meaningless term. It just means if an institution doesn't provide service that is equally applicable to every race and colour and creed and that it serves, then it's institutionally racist. Well, I can't think of an organisation that isn't institutionally racist, if that's the definition. But what they it's a bit like you can do anything but don't tread on my blue suede shoes. You can accuse the police of anything except you can't accuse them of racism. The problem here is a lot of police officers equate blackness with criminality. If you're a young black man in particular, then you must be a robber or you must be somehow involved in criminality. And therefore, a lot of police officers say, I'm not racist at all, I target criminals. Except in their view, criminals are black. Racial stereotyping is what it is. And it still goes on. So you're still 5 times, even though they cut down stop and search a lot, you're still 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're black than if you're white. And they cannot come up with an explanation. Well, I can come up with an explanation, and I've just given it to you. When I talk about black people, I'm talking about Caribbean origin, African origin people. With the rise of Islamist based terrorism, then powers under the Terrorism Act, which were even worse than ordinary stop and search for a while, in that you didn't have to have reasonable suspicion, they were targeted on Asian people. So they came in for a hard time. But generally, if it's to do with drugs, if it's to do with knives, if it's to do with robbery, then it's black people who are targeted. And, if somebody commits a robbery in Brixton and the description goes out, oh yeah, it was a bloke around 18 to 20 who was black wearing a hoodie, and they use that as a reason why they can then go and stop and search half the street population of Brixton, because that covers about half the street population of Brixton at any one time. It's ridiculous. Because I did everything by the book. I wouldn't have anything to do with changing evidence or racism or anything like that. I mean, it was pretty lonely to begin with, and then as I became more and more senior, I was the one who called the tune, and people knew that around me they had better watch the way that they behaved. Trouble is with policing, 90%, 95% of the time, officers are out there on the street with no supervisor with them. And unless you can convince them that they shouldn't be doing it, unless you get them to the stage where they want to do the right thing, as opposed to telling them to do the right thing, there's no guarantee they're going to do what you ask. And there are not enough senior police officers who really mean it. They stand in front of a classroom full of cops and say, we're against racism and all the rest of it. And cops know, because they just look in the senior officer's eye and they listen to what he's saying and they know he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe what he's saying. And there were not many senior cops I knew who convinced me that they were really anti-racist. There was a guy that we were chasing who was a suspected robber. And he ran into an illegal gambling den. There were some in Roughton Road at the time. So I went and knocked on the door, and this older black guy answers the door. And I tell him that there's this guy that we've been chasing who's run into his place, and we think he's a robber. And he left the door slightly open, disappeared for a couple of minutes, came back with the guy and pushed him out of the door into our arms. Some weeks later, there was a guy who was smoking a spliff, smoking cannabis. Did the same thing. I knocked on the door. He said, what do you want? I said, the bloke we've been chasing, he just come into your place. He was smoking cannabis. He slammed the door in my face. 20 years later, when I was the police commander, I introduced a scheme where we didn't arrest people for possession of cannabis at all, because I'd learnt my lesson. I got moved out of Brixton as the commander, and there was he is a controversial character, but a bloke called Lee Jasper, who was at the time Ken Livingstone, who was Mayor of London's advisor on policing and on race issues. And he, in a public statement, said that nobody in Brixton trusted the police until Brian Paddick became the police commander. And that's one of the proudest things. Plus, when I got moved out, there was a public meeting. This was 20 years after I was behind a plastic shield having stuff thrown at me. 20 years later, there was a public meeting at Brixton Town Hall. 600 local people turned up demanding my reinstatement as their police commander. It's quite a turnaround.